Arthur was a fixture. Every morning, as reliably as the sunrise, he would shuffle his way to the park. He wasn't sprightly, not anymore. His steps were slow and deliberate, aided by a gnarled wooden cane that seemed as old as he was. He'd pause at the gate, a wrought iron archway adorned with faded green paint, and survey the scene. Children shrieked with laughter as they chased pigeons. Dogs strained at their leashes, eager to sniff every blade of grass. Lovers strolled hand in hand, lost in their own little world. But Arthur's destination was always the same, a weathered wooden bench nestled beneath the sprawling branches of an ancient oak tree. The locals, the shopkeepers sweeping their sidewalks, the mothers pushing strollers, they all knew Arthur. They'd nod in his direction, offer a polite, "Good morning, Arthur," and then go about their day. They figured he was just an old man, lost in memories. Reminiscing, they called it. Remembering days gone by. Perhaps thinking about a sweetheart, or a long-lost friend, or adventures he'd had in his youth. They saw him as a harmless, quiet presence, a living piece of the park's history. They didn't know the half of it. They saw the slumped shoulders, the faraway gaze, the gentle sigh that escaped his lips as he settled onto the bench. They assumed it was the sigh of an old man weary from years of living. They didn't see the weight he carried, the promise etched into his very soul. They didn't see the ghost that sat beside him. He'd sit there for hours, unmoving, a statue carved from time and grief. Sometimes, he'd close his eyes, and the sounds of the park would fade away, replaced by the distant echoes of gunfire and the frantic shouts of men. Other times, he'd watch the children play, a faint smile gracing his lips as he imagined the futures they had ahead of them, futures that others had been denied. The park was his sanctuary, his connection to a past he could never escape. It was a place of quiet contemplation, a place where he could honor a debt he could never repay. And so, every morning, Arthur made his pilgrimage to the park bench, a silent sentinel guarding a promise made in the face of death. He was more than just an old man reminiscing, he was a keeper of a flame, a guardian of a memory. He was waiting. The park wasn't just Arthur's domain. It belonged to everyone, big and small, young and old. And among the park's most enthusiastic inhabitants was Lily. Lily was a whirlwind of energy, a spark of sunshine in a bright yellow raincoat even on the cloudiest days. She was 8 years old, with pigtails the color of straw and eyes that missed nothing. While the other children were content to chase squirrels or swing so high they almost touched the sky, Lily was drawn to the park's quieter corners, the places where stories seemed to linger in the air. She loved the whispering willow tree by the pond, where she'd sit and imagine herself as a fairy princess. She loved the rose garden, where she'd search for the perfect bloom, one with petals so soft they felt like velvet. And she noticed Arthur. She noticed him sitting on the same bench, day after day, rain or shine. She noticed the way he seemed to watch the world from a distance, his eyes filled with a sadness she couldn't quite understand. While the other children saw him as just another old man, Lily saw something different, something intriguing. She saw a story waiting to be told. She'd seen him toss breadcrumbs to the pigeons, his movements slow and gentle. She'd seen him trace patterns in the dirt with the tip of his cane. And she'd seen him smile, a fleeting, wistful smile that hinted at a life lived long ago. Her mama always told her to be respectful of elders, and to let people have their space. But Lily was also curious, a trait her mama also encouraged, within reason. She knew, deep down, that Arthur wasn't just some grumpy old man who wanted to be left alone. She sensed a kindness in him, a loneliness that mirrored her own at times, when her best friend was sick and couldn't come out to play. So, she watched him, studied him, trying to piece together the puzzle of Arthur. She wanted to know why he came to the park every day. She wanted to know what he was thinking. She wanted to know his story. One morning, armed with a half-eaten peanut butter sandwich and a heart full of courage, Lily decided to approach him. The sun was shining, birds were singing, and Arthur was sitting on his usual bench, lost in his usual thoughts. It was the perfect day to say hello. Lily skipped towards the bench, her yellow raincoat a bright beacon against the green of the park. She clutched her half-eaten peanut butter sandwich a little tighter, her heart thumping like a hummingbird's wings. As she got closer, she could see the wrinkles etched around Arthur's eyes, lines that spoke of laughter and sorrow, of sun and storms. He seemed even smaller up close, his shoulders slightly hunched, his gaze fixed on something far beyond the park's borders. Taking a deep breath, Lily stopped a few feet from the bench. "Hello," she said, her voice a little shaky. Arthur didn't seem to hear her at first. He remained motionless, lost in his own world. Lily was about to try again when he finally stirred, his head turning slowly in her direction. His eyes, the color of faded denim, widened slightly as he took in the sight of the little girl in the yellow raincoat. "Well, hello there, little one," he said, his voice raspy, like dry leaves rustling in the wind. "What brings you here?" Lily took another step closer, her nervousness fading slightly under the warmth of his gaze. "I'm Lily," she said, holding out her sandwich as if offering a peace treaty. "And I was wondering. Why do you come here every day?" Arthur looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time. He saw the genuine curiosity in her eyes, the innocent question that held no judgment, no pity. He saw a spark of something familiar, a yearning for connection that mirrored his own. He hesitated. He hadn't spoken to anyone about Tom, about the war, about the promise, in years. It was a part of his life he kept locked away, a secret he guarded fiercely. But there was something about Lily, something disarming and pure, that made him consider opening up, just a crack. He looked down at his hands, gnarled and spotted with age, and sighed. "That's a long story, little one," he said. "A very long story." Lily didn't flinch. "I have time," she said, plopping down on the bench next to him, careful not to get peanut butter on his coat. "And my mama always says long stories are the best kind." She took a big bite of her sandwich, her eyes never leaving Arthur's face. Arthur chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that seemed to shake the very leaves on the oak tree above them. Maybe, just maybe, it was time to tell his story. Maybe, after all these years, it was time to share the burden he had carried for so long. He looked at Lily, her bright, expectant face, and knew that if he was ever going to tell anyone, it would be her. "All right, Lily," he said, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "Where do you want me to begin?" He paused, thinking for a moment. "I guess it all started a long, long time ago." Arthur closed his eyes for a moment, and the park around him seemed to fade away. The laughter of children, the barking of dogs, the gentle breeze rustling through the leaves, all of it receded, replaced by a different set of sounds, a harsher symphony of explosions and shouts and the relentless, pounding rain of gunfire. "It was a long time ago, Lily," he began, his voice softer now, barely above a whisper. "Before you were even a twinkle in your parents' eyes. There was a war. A terrible war, far away from here." He paused, searching for the right words, words that wouldn't frighten her, words that would explain the pain without exposing her to the horrors he had witnessed. "I was just a young man then, not much older than your older brother, maybe. I thought I knew everything, that I was invincible. But war has a way of teaching you that you don't know anything at all." He opened his eyes and looked at Lily, making sure she understood. "We were soldiers, fighting for our country. We were scared, Lily. We were all so scared. But we had each other. We looked out for each other, we told jokes to keep our spirits up, and we dreamed of the day we could come home." He told her about the heat, the dust, the endless marches through unforgiving terrain. He told her about the camaraderie, the bonds forged in shared hardship, the way they relied on each other for survival. He spoke of letters from home, treasured reminders of the lives they were fighting to protect. He kept the details vague, focusing on the human element, the shared experience of young men far from home, longing for normalcy. "We were just boys, Lily," he repeated, shaking his head sadly. "Playing a man's game. A game with no winners, only losers." He didn't mention the blood, the screams, the faces of the dead. He didn't mention the fear that gnawed at him every waking moment, the fear that he would never see home again. He wanted Lily to understand that he wasn't just an old man sitting on a bench. He was a survivor. He had seen things that no one should ever have to see. And he carried those memories with him every day, a constant reminder of the price of freedom, the cost of war. It was a hard time, Lily, he concluded, his voice thick with emotion. A very hard time. But it made me who I am today. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and gratitude. And it taught me the importance of promises. He paused, and for a moment, the only sound was the gentle rustling of leaves in the wind. Then, he took a deep breath and prepared to tell her about Tom. His name was Tom, Arthur said, a faint smile gracing his lips. Tom Baker. He was from a small farm, just like my family's. Grew up chasing chickens and mending fences, just like me. He wasn't a hero, not in the way the storybooks tell it. He was just a good man, a kind man, a man who wanted to go home and marry his sweetheart, Mary Ann. He paused, lost in the memory of Tom's easy laugh, the way his eyes would crinkle at the corners when he smiled. Tom had a way of making even the worst situations seem a little bit brighter. He was the kind of friend who would share his last piece of candy, who would stay up all night to keep watch, who would always have your back, no matter what. We met during training, Arthur continued. We were both scared and homesick, and we just kind of gravitated towards each other. We discovered we had a lot in common, the love of the land, the dream of a simple life, the longing for the familiar comfort of home. He told Lily about the silly pranks they played on each other, the late-night talks under the stars, the shared dreams of what they would do when they returned home. Tom wanted to open a bakery, he explained, a place where the aroma of fresh bread would fill the air and everyone would feel welcome. He described, in vivid detail, the kinds of pies he would bake, the cookies he would decorate, the cakes he would create for special occasions. Arthur, on the other hand, dreamed of returning to his family farm, of working the land and raising a family of his own. He and Tom spent hours sketching out plans, imagining their futures side by side, supporting each other's dreams. We were inseparable, Lily, Arthur said, his voice filled with warmth. We were more than just friends, we were brothers. We promised each other that we would make it home, that we would see our dreams come true. We promised each other that we would never forget. He fell silent, the smile fading from his lips. The memory of Tom was a bittersweet one, filled with both joy and pain. He had kept his promise, but at what cost? He looked at Lily, her eyes wide with anticipation, and knew that he had to tell her the rest of the story, the part that had haunted him for so many years. The part about the battle, the promise, and the sacrifice. The part about Tom's last wish. But, Arthur said softly, war has a way of breaking promises. The air crackled with tension, thick and heavy like a summer storm about to break. Arthur swallowed hard, the memory of that day as vivid as if it were yesterday. We were pinned down, he said, his voice barely audible above the imaginary sounds of war that only he could hear. The enemy was everywhere, and we were running out of ammunition. He described the scene in fragments, careful to shield Lily from the full brutality of it. The ground was torn apart by explosions, the sky filled with smoke and the acrid smell of gunpowder. Men were shouting, crying, praying. The world had become a chaotic blur of noise and fear. Tom and I, we found ourselves huddled together behind a crumbling wall, Arthur continued. It wasn't much, but it was all we had. We were firing back as best we could, trying to keep the enemy at bay. He explained how the battle raged on for what seemed like an eternity, how the hope of survival dwindled with each passing moment. He described the feeling of utter helplessness, the realization that their lives were hanging by a thread. Then, it happened, Arthur said, his voice cracking with emotion. A mortar shell landed just a few feet away from us. The explosion threw us both against the wall. I was lucky, I only got a few scratches. But Tom. He trailed off, unable to continue. The image of Tom lying on the ground, his face pale and contorted in pain, was seared into his memory. He could still hear Tom's ragged breathing, feel the warmth of his blood on his hands. He looked at Lily, her eyes wide with concern, and took a deep breath. He had to finish the story. He owed it to Tom. He owed it to himself. Tom was badly hurt, Lily, he said, his voice trembling. Very badly hurt. He knew he wasn't going to make it. He paused, gathering his strength. And that's when he asked me to make him a promise. He closed his eyes, and the image of Tom's face became even clearer, his voice even louder. The promise he made that day, the promise that had defined his life for so many years, echoed in his ears. It was a promise he could never break, a burden he would carry until his dying day. The memory was a brand on his soul. A brand he would carry forever. He looked at me, Lily, his eyes filled with pain, but also with a strange kind of peace, Arthur said, his voice barely a whisper. He knew his time was short. He reached out and grabbed my hand, his grip surprisingly strong. He paused, taking a shaky breath. He said, Arthur, he said, if you make it out of here, if you survive this, you have to promise me something. Lily leaned in closer, her eyes wide with anticipation. She could feel the weight of the moment, the gravity of the promise that was about to be revealed. She knew, somehow, that this promise was the key to understanding Arthur, the reason behind his daily visits to the park bench. He said, promise me you'll go back home, Arthur. Promise me you'll go back to our town. And promise me you'll sit on that old park bench, the one by the oak tree. The one we always talked about. Arthur's voice cracked again, and he paused to compose himself. He could almost feel Tom's hand in his, hear his voice as clear as if he were standing right there beside him. Sit there for me, Arthur, he said. Sit there and remember. Remember our dreams, remember our families, remember everything we fought for. And remember me. Arthur looked at Lily, his eyes filled with tears. He wanted me to remember him, Lily. He didn't want to be forgotten. He wanted his life to have meant something. He explained that Tom knew he wouldn't be able to fulfill his own dreams, that he wouldn't be able to open his bakery or marry Marianne. But he wanted Arthur to carry on his memory, to keep his spirit alive. And so, Arthur said, his voice filled with determination, I made him that promise, Lily. I promised him that if I survived, I would go back home and sit on that park bench, every day, for as long as I lived. I promised him I would never forget. He owed Tom that much, and more. It was the least he could do. The very least. He pauses, and with a sigh, looks to the sky as if to glimpse the face of an old friend. I had no idea what that promise would mean, or how it would shape my life. And then, Arthur said, his voice heavy with sorrow, Tom closed his eyes. He took one last, shuddering breath, and then, he was gone. The silence that followed was deafening. Lily sat beside Arthur, her small hand reaching out to gently touch his arm. She didn't say anything, she didn't need to. Her presence was enough, a silent offering of comfort and understanding. Arthur looked at her, his eyes filled with tears. He died in my arms, Lily, he said, his voice barely audible. A good man, a kind man, a man who deserved so much more. He died believing that I would keep my promise. He explained how he had stayed with Tom's body until the medics arrived, how he had helped to carry him back to camp, how he had written a letter to Marianne, the hardest thing he had ever done in his life. He told her about the funeral, the somber ceremony under a leaden sky, the rows of white crosses stretching as far as the eye could see. After that, Arthur said, everything changed. The war seemed even more pointless, even more cruel. I just wanted to go home, to escape the madness and the pain. I wanted to go home and keep my promise to Tom. He described the long journey back, the weeks spent on crowded ships and trains, the endless waiting and the gnawing anxiety. He spoke of the survivor's guilt that plagued him, the feeling that he didn't deserve to be alive when Tom was dead. When I finally arrived back in our town, Arthur said, it felt like a dream. Everything was just as I remembered it, the familiar streets, the friendly faces, the comforting scent of home. But everything was also different. Because Tom wasn't there. He paused, looking around the park as if searching for Tom's ghost. The first thing I did was go to the park, he said. I walked straight to that old park bench, the one beneath the oak tree. And I sat down. He looked at Lily, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and resolve. And I've been sitting there ever since. He wasn't sure why, but he felt like he could tell Lily anything. He felt like she understood. The weight of Tom's death, the burden of his promise, had shaped his life in ways he could never have imagined. But he had kept his word. He had honored Tom's memory. And in doing so, he had found a measure of peace. Even if that peace was often interrupted by the ghosts of his past. He knew he must carry on. The journey home wasn't easy, Lily, Arthur continued, his gaze fixed on a distant point beyond the park. It wasn't just the physical hardship, the endless travel and the lack of sleep. It was the mental battle, the constant struggle to keep Tom's memory alive, to hold on to the promise I had made. He described the way he would replay their conversations in his head, trying to recall every detail, every joke, every dream they had shared. He would look at the faces of the other soldiers returning home, wondering if they, too, carried the weight of broken promises and lost friends. Every step of the way, I was reminded of Tom, Arthur said. Every familiar sight, every shared memory, it was all a painful reminder of what I had lost. He explained how he had visited Marianne, Tom's sweetheart, and delivered the letter he had written. He described the heartbreak in her eyes, the tears that streamed down her face as she read Tom's last words. He had felt a profound sense of guilt, knowing that he was alive while Tom was dead, knowing that he would get to go home to his family while Marianne would be left with only memories. I told her about the promise I had made to Tom, Arthur said, and she thanked me for it. She said it meant a lot to her to know that Tom wouldn't be forgotten. He also told his own family. It was a difficult conversation, but he knew he had to share his burden with them. They listened patiently, offering comfort and support. They understood the importance of the promise he had made, and they vowed to help him keep it. When I finally arrived at the park, Arthur said, I felt a strange sense of peace. It was like I had finally come full circle, like I had finally honored Tom's memory in the way he had wanted me to. He paused, looking at Lily with a sad smile. But the journey wasn't over, Lily. It had just begun. The true test would be the days and years to come, the constant commitment to keeping his promise, to sitting on that bench every day, remembering Tom and their shattered dreams. And he knew that with each passing day, it was getting harder and harder to bear. He wondered when the burden would become too heavy, and if he would finally break. He hoped that Lily would keep him strong. It was more than just sitting on a bench, it was about keeping a part of Tom alive. So, every morning, Lily, Arthur said, gesturing around the park with a sweep of his hand, I come here. I sit on this bench. Rain or shine, hot or cold. I've been doing it for longer than you've been alive. He chuckled softly, a sound that was more sad than mirthful. The locals, they think I'm just an old man, lost in his memories. They probably think I'm remembering my wife, or my children, or some grand adventure I had in my youth. He paused, looking directly at Lily. They don't know about Tom. They don't know about the war. They don't know about the promise. He felt a strange sense of relief, having finally shared his secret with someone. It was like a weight had been lifted from his shoulders, just a little bit. This bench, he continued, tapping the weathered wood with his cane, it's more than just a place to sit. It's a memorial. It's a reminder. It's a connection to a life that was cut short. He explained that some days, it was easy to sit on the bench, to remember Tom with fondness and gratitude. Other days, it was almost unbearable, the memories too painful, the guilt too heavy. But he always came back, drawn by an invisible force, compelled to keep his promise. I sit here and I think about what Tom would be doing if he were still alive, Arthur said. I imagine him running his bakery, filling the town with the smell of fresh bread and sweet pies. I imagine him married to Marianne, surrounded by children and grandchildren. He sighed, his shoulders slumping slightly. And then I realized that none of that ever happened. That all those dreams were lost, all that potential was wasted. And it breaks my heart all over again. He looked at Lily, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and hope. But I keep coming back, Lily. Because I have to. Because I promised Tom I would never forget. And because, in a way, I feel like I'm keeping a part of him alive, as long as I keep sitting on this bench. He paused, allowing his words to sink in. He had told her everything, shared his deepest secrets, revealed the burden he had carried for so many years. Now, it was up to her to decide what to do with that information. He just hoped she wouldn't run away. He hoped she wouldn't judge him. He hoped she would understand. He hoped she would stay. Lily didn't run. She didn't judge. She didn't even seem surprised. She just sat there, quietly, her eyes fixed on Arthur's face, absorbing every word, every emotion. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, she spoke. That's a really sad story, Arthur, she said, her voice soft and gentle. But it's also a really good story. A story about friendship and promises and never forgetting. She reached out and took Arthur's hand, her small fingers wrapping around his gnarled ones. I think Tom would be really happy that you're keeping your promise, she said. I think he'd be proud of you. Arthur's heart swelled with emotion. He had expected pity, or discomfort, or even disbelief. But he hadn't expected this simple act of kindness, this profound understanding. Thank you, Lily, he said, his voice thick with emotion. That means a lot to me. He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw a spark of something special, a depth of compassion that belied her young age. He realized that Lily wasn't just a curious little girl, she was a kindred spirit, a soul who understood the importance of memory and the power of connection. I don't think it's just about keeping a promise, Arthur, Lily continued. I think it's also about sharing Tom with the world. About making sure his story is never forgotten. She paused, thinking for a moment. Maybe, she said, maybe you could tell other people about Tom. Maybe you could write a book, or make a movie, or something. Arthur chuckled, a genuine laugh this time, filled with warmth and affection. I don't know about that, Lily, he said. I'm just an old man. I don't know anything about writing books or making movies. But you know about Tom, Lily insisted. And that's the most important thing. You could tell his story in your own words, in your own way. And I could help you. Arthur looked at her, his eyes filled with gratitude. He had come to the park that morning feeling old and weary, burdened by the weight of his memories. But now, thanks to Lily, he felt a flicker of hope, a glimmer of possibility. Maybe, just maybe, he could find a way to share Tom's story with the world. And maybe, in doing so, he could finally find some peace. Maybe, together, they could keep Tom's light from ever fading. What do you say we start tomorrow? Lily said, her eyes sparkling with excitement. We can call it, Tom's Bench. Arthur smiled, a genuine, heartfelt smile that reached all the way to his eyes. Tom's Bench, he repeated, testing the words on his tongue. I like that, Lily. I like that a lot. He looked around the park, seeing it now through Lily's eyes. It wasn't just a place of memories and regrets, it was a place of possibility, a place where stories could be told, where connections could be made, where even the heaviest burdens could be lightened. All right, Lily, he said, his voice filled with newfound energy. Let's do it. Let's tell Tom's story. But where do we even begin? Lily's eyes sparkled with excitement. We can start with the bakery, she said. You told me Tom wanted to open a bakery. We can draw pictures of all the pies and cookies he would have made. Arthur chuckled. That's a good idea, Lily. Tom always did have a sweet tooth. And so, the next morning, Arthur and Lily met at the park bench again. This time, Lily brought a stack of drawing paper and a box of crayons. They sat side by side, their heads bent over the paper, their imagination soaring. Arthur, with his shaky hands and faded memories, described the kinds of pies Tom would bake: apple, cherry, blueberry, each one bursting with flavor and love. Lily, with her boundless creativity and youthful enthusiasm, brought those descriptions to life with vibrant colors and whimsical details. They drew mountains of cookies, decorated with sprinkles and frosting, each one unique and delicious. They drew towering cakes, adorned with flowers and ribbons, each one a masterpiece of confectionery art. As they drew, Arthur shared more stories about Tom, snippets of his life, fragments of his personality. He told Lily about Tom's love of animals, his talent for storytelling, his unwavering optimism. He described the way Tom would always lend a helping hand, the way he would always put others before himself. Lily listened intently, her eyes shining with admiration. She began to see Tom not just as a name, but as a real person, a good and kind man who had been taken too soon. She felt a connection to him, a sense of responsibility to keep his memory alive. They worked together for hours, lost in their creative endeavor. The park around them faded into the background, the sounds of the city fading into a gentle hum. It was as if they had created their own little world, a sanctuary of creativity and connection. From that day forward, Lily became a regular fixture at Tom's bench. Every morning, after finishing her breakfast and before starting her day, she would make her way to the park, eager to spend time with Arthur and continue their project. They drew more pictures, of course, filling their notebooks with images of Tom's life and dreams. But they also did other things. They read books together, sharing their favorite stories and poems. They played games, challenging each other to riddles and word puzzles. They simply talked, sharing their thoughts and feelings, their hopes and fears. Arthur told Lily more about his life, about his family, about his experiences after the war. He told her about the challenges he had faced, the obstacles he had overcome, the lessons he had learned. Lily, in turn, shared her own dreams and aspirations. She wanted to be a veterinarian, she explained, so she could help animals in need. She wanted to travel the world, to see new places and meet new people. She wanted to make a difference, to leave the world a better place than she found it. As they spent more time together, a bond formed between them, a connection that transcended age and experience. Arthur found solace in Lily's youthful energy and unwavering optimism. Lily found wisdom and guidance in Arthur's life experiences and gentle spirit. They were an unlikely pair, an old man haunted by the past and a young girl full of hope for the future. But somehow, they found a way to connect, to support each other, to heal each other. And in doing so, they discovered the true meaning of friendship, the power of connection, and the importance of never forgetting. They were, without realizing it, saving each other. Lily was saving Arthur from his grief. Arthur was showing Lily that even the most profound losses can be borne with grace and dignity. Their relationship was a testament to the resilience of the human heart. With each passing day, Arthur felt less alone with his memories, less burdened by his promise. Lily's presence at Tom's bench was a constant reminder that Tom's story was not just his to bear, but something to be shared, something to be celebrated, something to be remembered. Together, they were creating a legacy, a tribute to a life that had been cut short, but whose memory would live on forever. "This bench isn't just Tom's anymore," Arthur said one day, smiling at Lily. "It's ours." The townsfolk noticed the change in Arthur. The shopkeepers sweeping their sidewalks, the mothers pushing strollers, they all saw it. The slumped shoulders straightened a little. The faraway gaze softened. The gentle sigh that escaped his lips was now often followed by a chuckle, a smile, a spark of genuine joy. They saw him interacting with Lily, laughing and talking, drawing pictures and sharing stories. They saw the way his eyes lit up when she approached, the way he seemed to come alive in her presence. They started to wonder. What was it about this little girl that had brought about such a transformation in the old man? What was the secret behind their unlikely friendship? Some of them, the more curious ones, even started to approach the bench, to offer a friendly greeting, to ask about their project. They saw the drawings of the bakery, the mountains of cookies, the towering cakes. They heard snippets of Arthur's stories about Tom, about his life, about his dreams. And slowly, they began to understand. They began to see that Arthur wasn't just an old man reminiscing, he was a keeper of a flame, a guardian of a memory. He was honoring a promise, celebrating a life, and sharing a story that deserved to be told. They started to bring Arthur and Lily little gifts, a freshly baked pie, a bouquet of flowers, a box of crayons. They offered words of encouragement, expressions of support, gestures of kindness. The park, once just a backdrop to Arthur's solitude, became a gathering place, a center of community, a testament to the power of connection. Tom's bench, once a symbol of loss and remembrance, became a symbol of hope and healing, a place where stories were shared, where friendships were forged, where memories were kept alive. Even Marianne, Tom's sweetheart, came to visit. She was an old woman now, her face etched with the lines of time and experience. But when she saw Arthur and Lily sitting on the bench, drawing pictures of Tom's bakery, her eyes lit up with recognition. She sat down beside them and listened to Arthur's stories, her hand resting gently on his arm. She smiled sadly, remembering a love that had been lost too soon. "Thank you, Arthur," she said, her voice trembling with emotion. "Thank you for keeping Tom's memory alive. You don't know how much it means to me." As Arthur looked around at the faces of the people who had gathered at Tom's bench, he realized something profound. He realized that he wasn't just keeping a promise to Tom, he was also honoring his memory, inspiring a new generation, and bringing a community together. He had started out simply trying to fulfill a vow, to ease his own guilt and sorrow. But in sharing Tom's story, he had discovered a greater purpose, a deeper meaning. He had learned that even the most tragic losses can be transformed into something beautiful, something meaningful, something that can touch the lives of others. He saw Lily, her eyes shining with excitement, her hands covered in crayon dust. He saw Marianne, her face filled with gratitude, her heart warmed by the memories of a lost love. He saw the townsfolk, their faces etched with understanding, their spirits lifted by the power of connection. And he knew that Tom would have been proud. He knew that Tom would have been happy to see his story being shared, his memory being celebrated, his life being honored. "I never realized," Arthur said to Lily one day, "that by keeping my promise to Tom, I would be doing so much more than just sitting on a bench." He paused, smiling at her. "I thought I was just remembering him. But I realize now that I'm also inspiring you, and all these other people, to remember him too. And that's the greatest gift I could ever give." He realized that Tom's bench wasn't just a place of remembrance, it was a place of inspiration, a place of hope, a place where the past could inform the future. It was a place where anything was possible, as long as people were willing to connect, to share, and to remember. Arthur knew that Lily had opened his heart. Now, it was time to open his mind to the possibilities of the future. Together, they would shape the park. Together, they would keep the memory of Tom alive for generations to come. The sun began to set, casting long shadows across the park. Arthur looked at Lily, his heart filled with gratitude. "It's getting late, Lily," he said. "Time to go home." Lily nodded, gathering her crayons and drawings. "See you tomorrow, Arthur," she said, her voice filled with warmth. "See you tomorrow, Lily," Arthur replied, watching as she skipped away, her yellow raincoat a bright beacon in the twilight. He was no longer alone. He had Lily, and he had the community, and he had Tom. And that was all that mattered. He smiled softly, finally at peace. "Thank you, Tom," he whispered to the wind. And so, Arthur continued to meet Lily at Tom's bench each morning. They continued to draw pictures, to share stories, to laugh and to learn. They became an inseparable pair, an unlikely friendship that blossomed in the heart of the park. The townsfolk continued to visit, to offer their support, to share their memories of Tom. The park became a place of celebration, a place where Tom's life was honored, a place where his memory would live on forever. Arthur realized that he had finally found peace. He had kept his promise to Tom, but he had also found something even more valuable, a connection to the present, a sense of purpose, and a reason to keep living. He learned that even the heaviest burdens can be lightened by sharing them, that even the deepest sorrows can be transformed into something beautiful, and that promises, though born of loss, can bring unexpected joy. He saw Lily grow into a young woman, her passion for animals unwavering, her determination to make a difference unwavering. He watched her leave for college, to pursue her dream of becoming a veterinarian. He knew that Tom would have been proud of her. Even after Lily left, Arthur continued to visit Tom's bench each morning. He would sit there, remembering Tom, remembering Lily, remembering all the lessons he had learned. He knew that Tom's story would continue to be told, that his memory would continue to inspire others, and that the park would continue to be a place of connection, a place of hope, a place where anything was possible. And as he sat there, under the shade of the old oak tree, he smiled. He was no longer just an old man reminiscing. He was a keeper of a flame, a guardian of a memory, a symbol of hope. He was Arthur, and he was finally at peace. He knew that Tom would never truly be gone, as long as he kept his promise. As long as he kept sitting on the bench. As long as he kept sharing the story. One sunny morning, many years later, a young girl in a bright yellow raincoat approached Arthur at Tom's bench. She looked at him with wide, curious eyes and asked, "Excuse me, sir, why do you come here every day?" Arthur smiled, a gentle, knowing smile. "That," he said, "is a long story." And as he began to tell the story of Tom, of the war, of the promise, he knew that the cycle would continue, that the memory would live on, and that Tom's bench would forever be a place of hope, healing, and connection. The end.